Imagine someone accuses you of something you didn't do. Your first instinct is probably to explain. You start giving details. What happened? Why it happened? What you actually meant. You want them to understand, so you keep talking, and somehow, the more you explain, the less convincing you sound. Why? Because there's a strange psychological effect happening underneath. When you desperately try to prove that you're a good person, people don't just hear your explanation. They notice how badly you need them to believe it. And that changes the way they perceive you. Think about the difference between these two responses. Someone says, "Why didn't you come to the party?" The first person immediately starts talking. "I actually wanted to come, but then this happened, and I had to do this, and I wasn't trying to ignore you." The explanation keeps getting longer. Now imagine someone else simply says, "I couldn't make it that night." That's it. No 10-minute defense, no panic, no desperate attempt to control the other person's opinion. Which person seems more secure? Usually, the second one. Not because they necessarily have a better excuse, but because they don't seem terrified of being misunderstood. And that creates something powerful. Perceived confidence. Your brain constantly looks for signals of certainty. When someone speaks calmly, doesn't rush, and doesn't desperately defend every little decision, we often assume they trust themselves, and if they trust themselves, maybe we should trust them too. But there's an important distinction here. Not explaining yourself doesn't mean refusing to communicate. That's not confidence. That's avoidance. If you hurt someone, you should explain. If you made a mistake, you should take responsibility. If someone genuinely needs information, give it to them. The problem begins when explanation turns into justification. You're no longer communicating. You're trying to control how another person sees you. And that's where things get interesting. Because the harder you try to control someone's opinion, the more obvious your insecurity can become. Imagine someone says, "I don't like your idea." You could spend 5 minutes proving why they're wrong. Or you could simply say, "That's fair. I still think it's the right decision." Notice what happened. You didn't win the argument. You didn't force them to agree. You simply showed that their disagreement didn't destroy your confidence. And people notice that. Because confidence isn't always loud. Sometimes, confidence is the ability to let someone misunderstand you, without immediately chasing after them to fix it. Here's where things get even more interesting. Humans are constantly trying to figure out what other people believe about themselves, and one of the strongest clues is how much they try to prove their own value. Think about someone who constantly talks about how successful they are, how many people they know, how much money they make, how important their work is. At first, it might sound impressive, but after a while, something changes. You start wondering, why do they need me to know this? The information didn't become less impressive. Your interpretation changed. Because people don't just judge the message, they judge the need behind the message. And this is why over-explaining can be so damaging. Imagine you're late. You arrive 5 minutes late. You say, "Sorry, I'm late." Simple. Now imagine saying, "Sorry, I'm late. I was leaving on time, but then my phone died, and I had to charge it, and then traffic was terrible, and I know you probably think I don't respect your time, but that's not what happened." Same situation. Completely different impression. The second person might actually have a perfectly valid reason, but their desperation to prove it creates a new signal. They seem nervous about being judged, and ironically, that can make the other person judge them more. This is one of the biggest traps in social behavior. You think you're protecting your reputation, but you're accidentally drawing attention to it. It's like pointing at a stain on your shirt and saying, "Don't look at that." Now everyone looks. The same thing happens psychologically. The more you announce that you're not insecure, the more people may notice your insecurity. The more you insist that you're not trying to impress anyone, the more obvious the performance becomes. And this leads to another powerful habit. Stop answering questions nobody asked. You don't need to defend every decision. You don't need to explain every preference. You don't need to convince everyone that your intentions were good. Sometimes, a simple answer is stronger. I didn't want to go. I changed my mind. That doesn't work for me. I made a mistake. I disagree. Notice how uncomfortable some of these sentences feel. That's the point, because many people aren't afraid of speaking. They're afraid of what happens after they speak. The silence, the judgment, the possibility that someone might disagree. So they keep talking. They add another sentence, then another, until their original confidence disappears underneath a mountain of explanations. But here's the strange part. When you become comfortable with someone not fully understanding you, your communication becomes clearer. You say less, but every word carries more weight, and people begin to sense something different. You're not asking for permission to exist. You're simply stating where you stand. Now imagine two people disagreeing. The first person becomes defensive. They interrupt. They explain. They bring up old examples. They desperately want to prove they're right. The second person listens, then says, I understand why you see it that way. I just see it differently. And stops. Who seems more powerful? Usually, the second person, not because they dominated the conversation, because they didn't need to. And that's the deeper lesson. Respect doesn't come from making everyone agree with you. It comes from showing that disagreement doesn't control you. You can apologize without begging for forgiveness. You can explain without desperately defending yourself. You can admit you're wrong without feeling smaller. And you can walk away from an argument without needing the final word, because eventually, you realize something. You don't have to convince everyone that you're confident. You just have to stop behaving like you need their approval. And ironically, that's often when people start giving it to you.